Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much at first to the chairpersons for giving me a chance here to present you the results of our work. The bad news is we have 1 hour now to discuss these data. The good news, it's not only me who will talk. If there are critical questions, I will ask Zan Fleming to help me. But hopefully it will not too often be the case. Those of you who have attended last year the EASD will have seen some of the data, some of the statements. However, the advantage is now that we get them published. I think especially with such a talk, it's important that you are aware of my potential conflict of interest. Some of you might know that I'm close to 2 institutes working in early phases of clinical development for novel drugs and devices, and I personally am a member of a number of advisory boards for different companies. So please keep my conflict of interest in mind. I'm not 100% sure, however, they declared that they will put them online in the editorial offices of Diabetologia and Diabetes Care. This is the pump statement, as we call it, inside our working group here, that the statement is now online. I would like to take the opportunity to thank people like Zen, however also John Pertwee, Reinhard Hall, Richard Bergenstell, and Ann Peters, to surviving our group for the last 1.5 years. And I think it's, in hindsight, it's impressive if you read these 5 or 6 pages, how long it takes until you have discussed each and every sentence back and forth. And if you then have finalized such a statement and send it to the office of the EASD, and suddenly some people say, this is not English, this is American English, then you see some of the Americans get, So it took us a while to come to the appropriate English, let's phrase it that way. However, now I think we hopefully have now something that is acceptable for all English-speaking people on the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is the idea behind having such a diabetes technology working group? The aim is to support patients, healthcare professionals, manufacturers, regulatory authorities, and healthcare policymakers in addressing medical devices used for diabetes treatment. Wow, what a statement. However, I think it hopefully comes across that we are not working against anybody. Our aim is to support all stakeholders in this technology world. The working group, and I will go into details in a second for which members are there, from both associations were selected in order to cover a wide range of expertise. That does not necessarily mean that all members are experts in insulin pumps in this case. The first statement here is on insulin pumps, and as we will see in a minute, we try to look on insulin pumps probably from some different point of view than you usually look on them. Other statements will follow. There might be changes to the people in the working group depending on the needs for other topics like blood glucose meters, CGM systems, or apps. Hopefully, the next statements will be published sooner than the first one. So here we have the members of the working group, and Ann Peters from Los Angeles, she has a strong interest in the practice of insulin pump treatment, and she has also worked at different other statements like ours, which was quite helpful. I think to introduce Rich Bergenstall is not necessary. He has a long-standing interest in diabetes technology, and Zan Fleming, who is with us today, also has a long track record in a number of different areas in diabetes therapy. John Pertwee, probably not all of you know him, he has quite an interest in diabetes, in different registries and so on, like Reinhard Hall from the southern part of Germany. He's a pediatrician, and he is working here clearly also with a number of registries in order to help kids, adolescents in Germany to get more understanding of what are the driving topics for them. As you can see myself, I'm located here, very close, 5 minutes from here, but I'm also quite distant when I live in part of the year in the US. So let's have a more specific look on the pump statement. So we try to look and understand, and let me mention understanding and learning quite a lot. I think all of us in the group were a little bit naive at the beginning. What are the systems in place? How well do they work? What are key points that we have to understand about the safety and clinical benefits of insulin pumps? We hope that the pump statement complement existing resources, and this is not a review about insulin pump therapy, not at all. We hope that we can complement it by coverage of key opportunities and challenges, especially with a view on post-marketing surveillance. We separated the manuscript into different sections that view on certain medical aspects or technical aspects. And our hope is that we will be able to generate a conversation and a focus on unresolved issues, and we try to pinpoint these unresolved issues in our statement. Hopefully, and I will come back to this at the end of my talk, this will serve as a basis, as a platform, where we can have discussions like we had in the morning when the different stakeholders were here from the Commission and so on, about healthcare providers and patients, and also with all other parties involved in the usage of pumps. Clearly also involving the regulatory authorities. And Bob Redner gave us a good idea what the FDA wants to do, and I'm looking forward to see a similar presentation from somebody from the European pendant to the FDA. I think this is a slide probably not necessary here at this group of experts, however, just to memorize it. If there is an interruption or a malfunction of insulin infusion, this can result in serious hazards, hypoglycaemia, ketoacidosis, hypoglycemia, or even death. The reasons for this are a little bit more tricky. You can easily say technical errors, but is an insulin infusion set which was not changed for 10 days, is this a technical error then, or is it a user error? Or is it a combination of this? So there's a number of interplays there, and probably this is something also to discuss. We had tried to learn, as I indicated, while we are writing the statement, and we had a call, for example, with the FDA. Those of you who know some people at FDA might be impressed to see who high-ranked people were here on the call, for example, Patricia Beeston, Stacy Beck, and so on. So they taught us a little bit, and then was on the call. I was not able, about the principle of how the FDA handles such pumps, what the approval for marketing is based on, what they're doing for post-marketing, and so on. And I will not go into details here. However, they hinted us also to their registry, and I will go a little bit into detail here. Nevertheless, before going into details, I think it's worth to critically think about diabetes registries and how can they help us to evaluate pumps, the safety and efficacy of pumps. And I think if is important to mention or to highlight, if the relevant information is recorded prospectively in a standardized way, and if the data are interpreted cautiously, and if the limitations of registries are taken into account, I think then diabetes registries can be of help. However, such registries do not substitute for randomized controlled trials. However, they are complementing it. So, and I see a need, coming back to this, for good studies with pumps and devices, and also for having a closer look at patient-reported outcomes. We looked at the MAUDE database, Manufacturer and User Facility Device Experience. This is a database of the FDA, and the FDA receives several hundred thousands of medical device reports each and every year. So you can imagine how many thousands then of such reports show up each and every day, how to handle it. And then the question is, okay, these are reports about injuries, about deaths, about malfunction, and so on. And the FDA declares that they use the MAUDE database to monitor device performance, to detect potential device-related safety issues, and so on, in order to have a better understanding of the benefit-risk assessment of these products. One of the advantages of MAUDE is that the database is publicly accessible. And one of us, and Peter's, performed a search supported by her husband, and they used certain search terms, pump, insulin infusion, and so on. I think that one of the first observations was that it's quite interesting to see how the number of such reports increased in 3 years only, from 2011 to 2013, and we are up to 24,000 of such reports in the year 2013. So these covers a wide variety of pump-related issues. So more reports might be available, but we might have not found them with our search terms that we have used. However, it looked appropriate to us. It's not easy to say what the individual report, what kind of problems was this. Was it really a technical issue? Was it a handling issue? And so on. So it's very difficult to obtain useful information from this database, such as age distribution of reports, types of adverse events, and so on. It's not possible to find them easily. One indication of how limited the value of this database is this observation. If you sort simply numerically the number of reports according to the companies, then you see that 81% of the reports are for pumps by Animas, 9% for Roche, 6% for Insulet, and Medtronic has less than 4% of all reports. And this is clearly not inconsistent with the market share of the insulin pumps. We are not 100% sure if these data are absolutely correct. However, that's the best we could find. And according to this, the market share of Medtronic is at least 60% or at least above 50%. So going back here, you can see Animas 81% of the number of reports, 60% market share, does not fit that well. And here again, you can see it in a graphical representation. And I think this shows quite nicely, okay, for some reasons, and we are not sure why, Animas has much more reports in the MAUDE database than other pump manufacturers. We also tried to find out, okay, what is the number of recalls that were reported? And there we also looked at the database. And you can search for medical device recalls and insulin pumps. We have found 124 entries. However, from the last 12 years, however, when you analyze them a little bit closer, and it will show you the 10 reports in a second, it's only 10. I'm assuming you cannot read them, depending on your eyesight. However, what you can learn, or what is interesting to note, is that many of these reports were dealing not with the pump itself, but with insulin infusion sets. So for us, and therefore we have a section about insulin infusion sets in our statement, it appears that insulin infusion sets are of particular concern, and both in the US and also in Europe, when it comes to the view on such infusion sets. If you check the internet and go to patient blogs, you find a number of reports about issues with infusion sets. However, if you look in the literature and try to find publications about insulin infusion sets, the outcome is nearly zero. We also contacted some pump manufacturers. And as you can see, we sent out emails, asked them if you can be of help with us, and you will see the questions in a second. We sent out emails to Animas, Cellnovo, Medtronic, Omnipod, Roche, and Tandem. However, the reply was by two companies in a direct communication with Omnipod and an in-person meeting with Tandem located in San Diego. And Roche Diagnostics sent us a set of slides responding to our questions. And these were our questions that we sent to them. Can you provide us with information about which standards do you use to prove safety and efficacy to regulatory agencies in the US, elsewhere? Can you provide us data about pump evaluation, and so on and so on? As you can see here, we try to get information by the pump manufacturers about what they are doing, how do they handle it. That only 50% responded, I think, was a little bit annoying to us. Ladies and gentlemen, let's make a long story, and I try to indicate that we really have worked on this for quite a while, short, and present you the recommendations. There's one table in the publication that you have all as a printout, and there are what we believe, we have 5 set of recommendations. What are the key points? You had the regulators here this morning, and I think what we asked them for is to harmonize the standards that has to be met by the pump manufacturing companies as both pre- and post-marketing stages. We believe they should us allow to provide and have a good access to a single publicly accessible and fully anonymized international database. Probably we can expand it from the current MAUDE system. This should help us to have access to all adverse event reporting. This database should be searchable in a manner that clinically relevant endpoints can be detected and found, like demographics, user errors, and so on and so on. So otherwise, such a database doesn't make any sense. And there should be an annual summary of regulatory activities published by the regulatory agencies that we understand, okay, have they understood where the issues are, how do they handle it, and so on. Number 2 here of the recommendations deals with the pump manufacturers. And we hope that we can convince them, in their own interest from our point of view, to be more transparent in the future, mainly to the regulators, but also to us as users. From our point of view, it would be helpful to have annual information about the number of individuals who use their pumps. Nowadays, if you try to answer the question, how many pump users do we have in Germany? There are wild guesses between 35 and 50,000 users. Nobody knows. We would like to know what are the type of patients using insulin pumps. The results of clinical research conducted into human factors, and this is an interesting and very positive approach by the FDA, we have not talked about today. I think this approach to have the human factors studied before they come to the market is quite helpful. However, these data should also be publicly become available. We also want to understand that all the features that are now built into pumps, we had the information about the limited number of patients that download the data from CGM systems. However, I also wonder how many patients use all the different type of BOLI and all the other features, and there's a little feature war there with pumps, who all use all these features. We should update, or the manufacturer should update the data on the comparability of their pumps with specific insulin formulations and infusion sets. There are concerns that certain type of plastic material with certain type of insulin pumped in a specific manner has a higher risk of a blockage of the infusion set than other insulin formulations. So we should have systematic data on the durability and precision of insulin pumping over time after real-world usage. In other words, we fully believe that the pumps precisely pump the insulin when it comes from the manufacturer. However, does it pump the insulin in the same precision after, 3 years of usage? We don't know. The manufacturer got back the pumps from a number of patients each and every year because there were failures and so on. However, the data about which pumps show issues is not openly accessible. Nevertheless, I think for clinicians it would be of help to understand are there certain types of pumps, infusion sets, that generate issues that might be of help for them, and I'll come back to this in a second, to treat their patients better. We should also have open listings of changes in device function, features, and specifications that are reported to authorities. It has been mentioned before today that sometimes the pump looks identical from outside. However, there might have been, 5 different versions of the software and other changes to the pump that might be irrelevant from a safety point of view. And we would like to have fully anonymized reports of all adverse events that have been presented in the other recommendations by the different pump manufacturers. Number 3, international and national professional societies, like the EASD, from our point of view, should provide updated guidelines on indications for insulin pump therapy. They should recommend appropriate forms of structured education required for new and established pump users. Quite often, to our understanding, pumps are handled just by email, by courier or something like this, and then the patient has to figure out, okay, how to use this new pump. We believe there is a need for a good education. And the centers, the practices that use or train such pumps should have a standard for their staffing, and the personnel, the diabetes team, should fully understand, okay, what are the certain options with a given pump, what are the critical aspects there, and so on. And we also believe if we can get such a high level of training to the patients, that will also help us to get better reimbursement for this type of work. Then not only the reimbursement for the hardware, also for this time required by the diabetes team. Recommendation number 4. We hope that we can get funding for additional, well-designed and performed independent clinical trials that help us to understand better the safety, efficacy, outcomes, and adherence under real-world conditions. For example, and we will present data later this year about this topic, what is the impact of lipodystrophy or scarring on insulin absorption when it comes to insulin pumps? You have to keep in mind the patients are inserting the infusion set over and over again at the same site, and the question is, how good is the absorption then? We should provide, or the research funding body should provide or facilitate financial support for long-term data collection, and we briefly talked already about registries. And I think if registries are handled in a smart way, this can be of high relevance. Last aspect here of the recommendations, the healthcare teams should encourage and support pump users under their care to report all adverse events. That sounds easy. However, if you ever, as a physician, tried to report an adverse event in Germany, you know that it's several hours of work. Nobody is applauding you that you're doing it, and you will not do it again. So I think we have to provide a structured training and a regular update for pump users according to the standards set by national and international guidelines. Sometimes patients are using the same pump over and over again without being aware of all changes, new technologies, and so on. So, ladies and gentlemen, after listening to all these statements, you might wonder, okay, what shall we do now? What is the way ahead? We believe that a specific action should be taken. For example, and I don't want to be a member of the task force, don't get me wrong. So I think a task force should be established that included members of all parties involved, also of regulatory agencies and patients, to work systematically on the topics that we have tried to raise. I believe that the EASD and the ADA should provide leadership in these activities. The task force should not represent another barrier for market access, but it should address patient-relevant safety issues. These safety and clinical effectiveness should be established specifically for each device or insulin infusion set, and we should also look at different user groups, for example, kids, or for different clinical situations. So normally if you address a company, you get a number of data, nice slides, but it tells you nothing about the certain patient groups and individual patients. We believe that there is a need for post-marketing surveillance, for good post-marketing surveillance, for safety and efficacy of insulin pumps, and these surveillance should be performed in a systematic manner, and all data should be made publicly available to the public. We believe that there is a drastic need to increase the transparency of the whole system. This sounds easy and straightforward. However, as we have learned, if you publish such data and a certain manufacturer or distributor don't like the data, they might sue you very easily. The reports to the regulatory authorities should include a categorization of pump use issues so that we have a complete picture of device malfunctions. There have been publications also in Diabetologia from France showing that these malfunctions show up more often than most of us will believe. And when we have a better understanding of partial or complete failures of pumps or infusion sets, I think this will help us as a group to understand what we have to do in order to have more safe pumps in the future. We have to analyze all aspects taken together, not certain parts, because it's a total system that we have to handle, not the individual components, and we must address all of these aspects. Pump incidence reporting should be searchable according to the model in year. That sounds probably a little bit weird for you. However, what we learned, one of our colleagues here, Thomas Pieber, some years ago, had an issue with a specific pump. And then he approached the manufacturer, and the manufacturer said, yeah, the number of the pumps that's printed on it, that's fine. However, which year? Is it from early in the year or later in the year? Because this is then a different type of pump. So it is a little bit more tricky than you might think at the first glance. So changes in the specific type of pump can represent a safety issue. So from our point of view, more support should be offered to the users, not just with hardware, as I mentioned before, but also with specific education and prevention of user errors. And let me clearly say again, the biggest portion of the reports in the MAUDE database are clearly user errors. Last but not least here, initial and follow-up training of users is clearly needed and has to be tailored and driven by a more comprehensive understanding of the reported adverse events. In other words, if there is a specific risk of user error with one type of pumps, then this should be very much in the focus of the training. The improvement in handling of issues related to the use of insulin pumps has and might have an impact on other medical devices, for example, CGM systems used in diabetes therapy. To repeat it again, we do not propose any more regulations if we can make sure that the current regulations are sufficient to provide all necessary information and action opportunities to handle issues with insulin pumps that become evident. The system already established in the US to monitor issues with insulin pump performance and their safety is not perfect. However, it appears to be better than that in the EU. So, ladies and gentlemen, to make a long story short, the systematic approach to better understanding of pump safety from a clinical point of view is desperately needed. The user error issues and infusion set problems make up many of the reported adverse events. Smart, adequate registries offers the potential to provide data and follow-up. And we hope that the series of recommendations we come along with help us to improve the current situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lutz. I think we have time for some comment or questions from the floor. Yes, on the front line, please. Microphone is coming.
Thank you for all the information. I'm Eglantine Barends, working at the Dutch Diabetes Association. I'm a policy advisor. We're in discussion with reimbursement companies who trying to buy the cheapest infusion sets possible. They're looking all over the world to get it for less money. And they're thinking about forcing pump users from 2016 to use these kinds of infusion sets. What could you advise me to do?
Not easy to answer. Let me try. In a sense, we see a similar situation in Germany when it comes to blood glucose meters. The issue, and probably this is a help for the industry, for the manufacturers, the issue is that I see that the manufacturer has not made clear, okay, if you have a higher quality infusion set, the risk of safety issues is lower than with a cheaper infusion set. Or that the measurement quality, not with all, but with most meters that are more expensive, is better than with cheaper meters in general. So the manufacturer until now have not done a good job in presenting in a head-to-head manner the outcome of studies in which different types of infusions that were studied, and that also the patients then, in patient-reported outcomes, were able to say, okay, this is much easier to handle, it lasts, I don't know, 2 days longer or what else. That would be of help then to discuss with the people who has to provide the money in Netherlands, that it doesn't make sense to use the cheapest infusion set.
Concerning this issue, do you think that it should be the duty and the task of the manufacturer, or should be an agency that really does the comparative effort? Because everything that comes from the manufacturer can be claimed to be, to some extent, self-promotional.
We, that means Guido Feckmann and myself, we are clearly advocates of an independent research institute doing such an evaluation of head-to-head comparisons. Because otherwise you always have the risk that somebody say, yeah, this study was paid by this manufacturer, or this study was paid by this manufacturer, and don't believe the data because it was paid by I don't know whom. So yes, I fully agree. I think at the end we have a need for such an institution that really independently can evaluate the performance of pumps, CGM system, AP systems probably in the future. And you might say, okay, another institute, another source of costs and so on. On the other hand, if you think about the amount of money that we spend for the technologies in the US and also in Europe, this might be, I don't know, 1 per mil or something like this. The cost for such an institute and evaluation would be relatively small. And let me make a little point here, a little sidestep. We are going to publish a letter to the editor in Diabetes Care soon, and it's dealing with pump-related outcomes, patient-related outcomes, PROs. We have the situation in Germany that hopefully we will get reimbursement for CGM sooner than later within this year, which we regard as a big step forward for CGM. The IQWiC here in Germany has analyzed hundreds of studies about CGM. At the end, they have analyzed 11. And they had a positive outcome when it comes to HbA1c hypoglycaemia, but not with respect to patient-related outcomes. In other words, in all these studies, the efforts made to have an evaluation of the patient-related outcomes, life, quality of life, and so on, were at the end useless, because the companies and also the scientists have not agreed on a certain set of surveys to be used. And our reason for the letter to the editor was, okay, please be aware and not to repeat this mistake with, for example, artificial pancreas again. Now we see a number of companies are developing artificial pancreas systems, and if each group now uses, and Stephen and others are here in the room, uses his own set of questionnaires, then again we might come in a situation where you cannot compare the data. So if we, as an academic association, work together with the industry at an early level in the development, probably we can get reimbursement earlier. That's good for the companies and good for the patients. Sorry for the lengthy.
Thank you. That was very clear and very useful. Yes, please.
Hello, Alexander Rügner, Roche Diagnostics. I have one comment for the pumps comparison. Pumps or insulin pumps are not regulated like BG, so we have not the same level of standardization. Is ever discussed about to have an ISO standard, which we have for the BG, for example, for the pumps? Because if you compare different pumps, you have different worlds. A pump from Medtronic is different from one from Roche. So it would be hard to have an equal comparison.
I think it's interesting when you start learning a little about pumps. The first thing is you have to learn insulin infusion is not continuous with insulin pumps, but it's done differently depending on the type of pump you're using. And I'm absolutely with you, it's not easy to compare it. However, the patients and the physicians, for them, the outcome is important. The details of the technology is not. So, but you have then to understand, okay, if I use this pump with a very low infusion rate, in a kid, for example, is there probably a risk of under-insulinization because only every 30 minutes a little insulin pulse is given or so? So I think there is a need from a clinical point of view, from a safety point of view, to better understand what the different pumps are using and how comparable they are. Let me jump on one, sorry, Joe, in a second. One aspect here, and this is the speed of Boli delivery. So if you want to apply a bolus of 10 units, depending on the type of pump you use, this can be done in a minute or in 10 minutes. And I think we don't understand right now what is the clinical relevance of such differences. Sorry. Joe.
Joe Bugler, Abbott Diabetes Care. Thank you very much. Excellent talk. The recommendations to the manufacturers, when you talk about more transparency to the regulators, who do you define as the regulators in Europe? Is that the notified body or the competent authority? Because I would say there are quite a few elements in that list that are transparent to the notified body as they review technical file and they come and audit the manufacturer. So I just wondered what you define as the regulator in Europe.
When I listened to Bob and his talk about the FDA, how easy his talk was, in a sense, because you just have to reproduce the figures from the FDA. I talked with Guido Freckmann about it, and I said, I'm a little bit jealous, because in Germany, in Europe, I don't know where to go to whom to talk to in order to have a similar partner in communication. So, coming back to your question, the notified bodies, I'm not sure if they are the appropriate partners. In Germany, to my understanding, it's a BfArM as a competent authority. However, communication with BfArM is also a bit tricky because the people responsible for certain topics change every 3 months depending on the internal needs and so on. So you have no straightforward and clear communication lines. And I think this is key, again, from a safety point of view, that physicians, that patients understand, okay, where I get the information from, who is my counterpart here? And I'm not fully understanding who the counterpart in Europe is.
So I was amazed at the willingness of the FDA to be on a telephone call with this committee and go through the detailed information they did, as compared to the manufacturers, only half of whom even responded to you. Did they Did the manufacturers give you any hint as to why they chose not to be cooperative?
I think at first probably then, but you were on the phone with the FDA. Can you make a short summary of the call then? There's a mic, to my understanding.
Right, and I don't think this is unusual that FDA attempts to be responsive to legitimate questions. I would say that is more and more business as usual at FDA, both on the drug and the device side. I don't have any insight into the relative less responsiveness of manufacturers. But while I'm on the floor, I just wanted to give a few acknowledgments. First of all, to our chairman of the working group, Lutz Heinemann did a great job, patient and persistent, and getting us eventually across the finish line.
You mean nasty.
Not at all. But also to Dr. Victor Jürgen, who has been a great leader of EASD, and in particular, a real encourager of this working group, and he has seen it through by appearing today. So we certainly want to acknowledge his important role in this matter and many, many others. I would also say that this was an extremely collegial group. There was no regional view that emerged. There were no points of view that favored one regulatory paradigm or another. It was mainly about inquiry and getting to some kind of understanding of the way things are, and hopefully to come to where things might be. And so it reminds me that we are in a global village as far as patients, regulators, and practitioners, and that the greater cooperation we have, the better all stakeholders would be served. I'm also reminded that Europe has taken the lead in the harmonization process, going back to the days of the common market when members were working towards union. It was necessary to harmonize a vast number of different perspectives and ways of doing things. That was taken to the pharmaceutical world in the early 90s, and I was privileged to be part of that and attended the first ICH meeting in Brussels in 1992. FDA actually went kicking and screaming and with a lot of skepticism. But fortunately, FDA embraced the process, and the rest is history. It's been an amazing achievement to have produced over 50 statements that support the development of pharmaceutical products. The same can be done on the device side, and there have been some rudimentary steps taken. But there's much more room for cooperation, for sharing different responsibilities across the globe. I think we can all understand that patients ultimately will be served better by having harmonization of the various aspects that are involved in manufacturing and evaluating medical device products.
Thanks, Alonso. And Bob, probably answering your question, and hopefully carefully enough, your question was, why in the hell have 50% of the manufacturers do not even respond to our questions? There are two thoughts I have. One, they are not used to get such questions and do not know to handle it. And second, they don't take us serious. So they are not used that physicians, medical associations come back with something they might regard as nasty or stupid questions. So I think it will depend quite a lot on how we go ahead, how the ADA, how the EASD will follow up on this position statement. So we might have a paper tiger here, as we say, or if we are able to push it to convince regulatory people, other people, politicians, let's go ahead in this direction, then probably the next time they might respond more easily.
Questions, comments? There's one particular aspect that, if I got it right in your conclusion, you sort of pointing out to the user errors as a good deal of the limitation for these devices. Does this bring us to consider how, or if we need a specific regulation in how to set the team and certify the team for the use of these devices?
As you might know, I'm not a physician. I'm not dealing every day with pump users and so on. But what I've learned, and Bob, you might know this better than I do, in the US you can get a pump via mail. And I think this is one of the issues. If you're not well educated and you have access to a complex technology without full understanding of what's going on, how to use it, I think it's you ask for trouble in a sense. Yeah? So from my point of view, such a device, which is in principle lethal or can be bring you to a certain risk, has to be handled to you via a diabetes team with a good understanding of the technology, that train you adequately, and so on.
Is there any more question or comments for Lutz? So if not, thank you very much, and congratulations for all you have done. This is very important. And I think that, I would like to reiterate your invitation for the ADA and EASD just to pursue what you have just started, which I think is very important. With that, I'll hand it over to Bob.